As we gather in this place, we come, I say this every week, but it's so true, that we come from different places and different things happening in our lives, different experiences, different worries, different ideas of what went well and what we want to recreate in our lives. And we come to this place hoping that when we're gathered here in community, those things that draw out the best of us will be highlighted in this place. So that when we go back to whatever it is we came from, whatever we left at the door, we can actually lift them up with more courage and more strength and more commitment than we had when we came into this place. We call ourselves a community, and we recognize the depth of that community when we realize how connected we are, not just one to the other, but to every human life on this planet. And not just every human being on this planet, but the whole of this planet, that we go back and tie ourselves, bind ourselves one to the other from the beginning of the universe. And so we are family, deeply, deeply interconnected. Because it is so, we seek to reverence all of life and everything on this planet, to reverence it in a way that makes it sacred to us, that requires that we honor it, that our relationship with it be one that is good and right and offers dignity. And in order to do that, we have to set before ourselves the value that we identify as love in the many iterations in which it is lived out. And because of that, because there are so many iterations, we have to consistently grow in wisdom, strengthen ourselves and our understandings that come to us from so many different perspectives, weave them into our own, change our own in response to them, and grow in our understanding of this world, of our place in it, of ourselves. It's work that we have to be about every day. And so we come to this place, inviting our hearts to open themselves to this work. I invite you now to a few moments to reflect upon why it is you're here, what it is you seek, what it is you offer, and how together we might weave ourselves more deeply into that community that is made up of everything in this entire universe. May we find the courage and the strength to walk in the path that we set for ourselves. I'm inviting you now to join us in this deep tradition that goes through the roots of our congregation, our community, and through our United Church heritage, through the whole of Christianity, and deep into the roots of that wraps the world in so many different ways. The outpouring of grief and of sadness, the exclamation of joy and beauty, all of these things that weave us together in community. We call it our time of sharing. Many call it time of prayer. But it's an opportunity for us to speak of those things that bring us great joy and those things that burden our hearts with grief, so that we might strengthen our community and make that path we walk upon a resilient one. At the beginning of our time of sharing each week, we name those places in the world or those groups that are in particular need at this time, whether that need has been ongoing for a long time or whether it's something, a crisis that has evolved over the course of the last few weeks or days or hours, and to offer them into this space so that as we each hear them, they're engraved on our hearts and we see the world differently through the plight of those we name. So I invite you to name those places at this time.
Calgary,
Syria,
Sierra Leone, Liberia, Indigenous peoples.
May we find ways to walk with the burdens carried by those people and those places named today, so that we might walk tenderly and lovingly and find ways to influence our world toward healing and toward hope, toward strength and toward courage. In this, our time of need, May love abound. I invite you now to share those things that are in your heart, those moments of joy and celebration, and those recognition of sorrow and loss. I have a microphone here I can share with you, and I think Wendy's running to get another one. Thank you, Wendy, for those who are on the other side of the hall. And I invite you, as we do, to, at the end of what it is that you offer, whether it's something of joy or something of sorrow, you could say, in this abundant blessing or in this our time of need. And the community, when they respond by completing that sentence, I have this image of them wrapping themselves around your concern, around your heart, as you share what it is that's on it with us. I'm going to begin today by sharing something with you that I should have shared last week and forgot to, and that was the passing of Keith Halpenny, Christy Cass's brother-in-law. Christy had invited us to carry him with us over the course of the last few months as he became more and more fragile as in response to cancer as it worked its way through his body. She shared with us that he had wanted to have a last ride in the boat at his cottage, which he was able to do, and enjoyed that. It was a profoundly beautiful time for the entire family, and one that they will hold for years to come. So for Christy and her family, for all who knew and worked with Keith and whose strength is still carried within them, may we hold them in our hearts in this difficult time, in this our time of need. May love abound. And many of you will too remember Bob Harvey, who used to sit right over here, who would stand and share the most provocative truths that were unfolding in the world during our time of sharing, and who challenged us to see them, sometimes with a perspective that made us uncomfortable, but that was always one that we needed to have. And Bob passed away this week. He had cared for his wife, Tina, for many years. Tina's health had continued to deteriorate, and so Bob hasn't been able to be with us for the last many, many months. And so his passing is a loss, but his voice continues in his children and grandchildren, and the wisdom with which he approached life will continue to burn brightly through their hearts. For those of you who don't know, or who didn't know Bob, at the courageous age of 80-something, Bob chose to leave his own faith tradition in which he had walked for the whole of his life to become a part of West Hill, because his beliefs had evolved to a point that he could no longer have them supported at the community that had been his home for 50 years. And so he made that shift and continued to honor it, even and especially when in relationship with those within his family and his former faith community that challenged him upon that. So we owe him a debt of gratitude to that. So for Tina, Bob's 5 children and many grandchildren, in this our time of need, may love abound, but in the abundant blessing that he was, we share the joy. And now, if there are any concerns or celebrations that you would like shared? Very quiet group today. Did you want to add something? Go ahead, Wendy.
I can probably say something because something very dear happened this week in my life. You all know, or most of you probably know, I feed feral cats. Well, the woman that started this whole thing passed away a couple weeks ago. And we found out just recently that she has left $10,000 to help these cats with their sicknesses and anything else that happens, food, etc., for the future. And we thought that was an amazing blessing. But also, I just wanted to put out there, she had 2 cats that she took in, feral cats, and they now need a home desperately. And I'm always appealing to everyone I know, can you take a cat, can you take a cat? So I've kind of worn out all my friends and family. So I'm asking you people here, and the nice thing about these cats is they come with a little bit of a dowry. So I don't want to say how much or anything, but if it's a financial issue that you can handle, there is a little money to help with that. But please, we don't want people taking the money and throwing the cat out the window. So you have to love cats, okay? I'm going to screen you thoroughly. But if that is an issue, just a little bit, they're costly. There is a dowry with each of these cats. So I just want to say, in this abundant blessing for that wonderful woman, we share the joy.
Thank you, Wendy. Anything else? Then I will just invite you to hold yourselves and one another in this space, to recognize that in each silent heart today much is going on, and that as we share this space and leave this space, invite you to see in each person stories that are untold, that you can't even imagine. And so walk with grace wherever you are and with whomever you happen to be sharing that moment. As we finish our time of sharing, we often name those people or groups that are doing work to make this world a better place, to find its way toward goodness and life abundant. And so I invite you to name those people and those groups at this time. Whitby's Muslim Shelter for Women and Children. In this abundant blessing, we share the joy. And now I invite you to share with me the words that we say each week, hoping that they carve a space in our lives so that we are challenged to live them out on a day-to-day basis. As I live every day, I want to be a channel for peace. May I bring love where there is hatred, and healing where there is hurt, joy where there is sadness, and hope where there is fear. I pray that I may always try to understand and comfort other people, as well as seeking comfort and understanding from them. Wherever possible, may I choose to be a light in the darkness, a help in times of need, and a caring, honest friend. And may justice, kindness, and peace flow from my heart forever. Amen.
So the reading is from this book, the Orenda. We have a couple of copies of it here. Of course, that is the book that we're celebrating when Joseph Boyden is here on September the 24th. Now this is the reading from the journal of Christophe, who's one of the characters in the story. He's the French Jesuit missionary in Joseph Boyden's The Orenda. Just one more reflection for now, something I find both fascinating and appalling. In matters of the spirit, these sauvages believe that we all have within us a life force that is similar, if you will, to our own Catholic belief in the soul. They call this life force the Orenda. That is the fascinating part. What appalls me is that these poor misguided beings believe not just humans have the Orenda, but also all animals, trees, bodies of water, even rocks strewn on the ground. In fact, every last thing in the world contains its own spirit. When I pushed Bert about this, he explained it to me in a rather odd way. He told me of a recent hunting trip in which he pursued a deer for a long time. Eventually he caught up and killed it. My Orenda overpowered its Orenda, he said. The deer's Orenda allowed me to take it. He then looked at me as if his words might explain with final clarity this strange belief of theirs. I have to admit, dear Superior, that I am still left confused.
The focus moment was written this week as I contemplated the change from working with you today on magazine, The Intelligent Optimist, to working on the Orenda and Joseph Boyden this week instead. And so I reflected on the way in which he has presented so much truth through such different eyes in the Orenda. And in each of those voices, there is much beauty and much pain. And so he has managed, in some ways, despite some of the graphic violence that we don't experience in our lives, he has yet been able to capture our own voice. And so we have much that we can take away from his work. If we could have understood the dignity in our pain, it may have taught us much about the world, about the other, about ourselves. But we were blinded by the intensity of our discomfort, the affront to our truths, the sour assault upon our beliefs. And so we took what it was that singed our confidence and mottled our certainties. We destroyed it, unwilling to leave it lying about, threatening to come up from behind us and shake our foundations again. If we had only recognized the dignity in our pain, we might have honored it and come to better know the world, to know them, to know ourselves. I've chosen today not to focus so much on the Orenda, which is a read that you all must embrace and engage, because it's a distinctly important piece of literature to be written in our time, trying to weave our hearts back together with the first peoples of this land so that we might find a way to move forward with dignity, with courage, and perhaps with a bit of understanding of that dignity in our pain that we live with on a day-to-day basis, but that we have burdened our sisters and brothers of the First Nations with in an intense and ongoing way. So I leave the book to you for your own perusal, but I'll draw from it as I speak today. Joseph Boyden has been a writer for many, many years, being recognized for his works in the past decade or so. But recognizing as a young adult that writing was what he wanted to do, finally being engaged in that occupation intentionally when he entered a Master's of Fine Arts in New Orleans. But to go back to his birth and his upbringing is to understand how he has been able to weave together these various voices that he has brought to life, not only in the Orenda, but in his previous books as well. Born into a family of 8 children, 4 boys and 4 girls, to a mother whose partner was much her elder, who indeed was a physician that had delivered into the world many of his friends' fathers. That's how much older he was than Joseph's mother. And to a family that also had 3 other siblings from a previous marriage. Joseph's father was a war-decorated hero, had his medal pinned to him by the king following the Second World War for work he did as a doctor during that war. His grandfather had been in the First World War, and the stories that he has woven together bring those truths, those lives to light in engaging and invigorating ways. The family was Catholic, and pride in the community was related to the number of children in a family, and gathering together, getting into the car every day to go to a mass, dressed apparently all in the same matching outfits, was a tradition that Joseph continues to remember, and one that strikes the memories of people who are invited to reflect upon him now that he has become an acclaimed author. The family was boisterous and engaged and did all kinds of things, but were traumatized when Joseph was 8. He woke up, recalling that he woke up in the morning feeling that the world had shifted and things were different, and going into his parents' room, finding his mother there, weeping because his father had died. Joseph's own father had lost his father when he was 8 years old as well. But it meant that the family, which had been surviving on a doctor's income, then had to regroup, reorient itself. It was in Willowdale at the time, and figure out how to survive on the income that his mother could bring in as a teaching assistant, caring for 8 children. And so the world turned differently after that day for Joseph. He became involved. He was a very rowdy kind of guy. He lists a number of things that his mother had to cope with. Incredible list of things that if you're a parent, you read one of them and you go, oh my goodness. But when Joseph finished that sentence, he said, and that was just me. This list of like 6 or 8 things. And his siblings and him were fairly wild children from his telling. But all of them have grown up from his telling to be respectful, engaged citizens who honor his mother for the work that she did. At her 80th birthday, his sister took her to her first powwow, and she engaged in it completely and fully, and has enjoyed those experiences subsequent to that. But Joseph was troubled, and 8 years after his father's death, on Halloween, his birthday actually, on his 16th birthday, he was at a party with his girlfriend. They had a good time, drank a little bit too much. He thought she was pretending she was a little more inebriated than she really was. And then when he dropped her off at her house and went to kiss her goodbye, she refused to kiss him, told him that she was finished with him, went in the house and shut the door in his face. And he walked disoriented from that. He adored this girl, and he was shattered at the loss that it was. And so walking along Steeles Avenue, he paced himself according to the traffic. And when the moment came that he knew a driver could not possibly stop, he threw himself in front of a car. The driver, a woman, drove over him with her wheel, and his jacket got caught in the undercarriage of the car and dragged him for some time before she, hysterical, was able to stop the car. He had serious skull injuries. He had his ribs, some of his ribs were in several pieces. He had a ruptured spleen and other internal organs. And to this day, he has a tire tread mark down one side of his back. His heart stopped several times during that time, but for some unknown reason, the doctors were able to put him back together. He remembers just as he hit the pavement, realizing it wasn't about the girl. It was because he was broken. And so he tells that story years, decades later. He shared that story in 2011 when the news of First Nations children killing themselves at a rate something like 100 times what normally happens in Canadian communities. He felt that his story of despair might offer some strength and some courage and some it gets better moments to those people with whom he shares an eighth of his blood. That they might realize that in the moments of their despair, there is much that they might yet pick up and find hope in their communities. And in the CBC program that he wrote and narrated called Walk to Morning, he implores them to do that. In 1990, 8 years after this suicide attempt, he published a small book of poetry. 35 copies of it were printed. But I found one of the poems in one of the reviews of the Orenda that it was online. He laughs and says that most of the poetry in that book was pretty pathetic, and most of us, when we look back at our first poems, think, oh my goodness, and are horrified by them. But the writer of the review recognized that this one somehow seemed to carry within it that yearning that Joseph stepped into, and then was able, within that, within the yearning, to find the pieces that would put him back together, so that he wouldn't any longer be broken as he had been that night 8 years before this book was published. The poem is called Tribal Water Carry Me. I must learn to use my history. See it as a divining rod. Scan the rock and scrub of my house. Find my tribal waters. That angry ocean where the desolate song of blue whales carries ancestral voices. The black backs of dolphins etched with our story. I want to merge myself into those dark waters. Let their waves drown me, soothe and whisper into my pores until I am just another wave, carrying memories like driftwood, ancient customs like grains of sand. When my past is complete, when I am complete, I can return wise, hurtle back roaring for the shore. It seems that in this story, the Orenda, Joseph has become that wave hurtling back toward the shore, carrying the intuitions, the stories, the realities of his people, 1/8 of himself, though it may be. The voice is full and rich, and he shares it in his previous novels and in this book. Sitting with the elders, hearing their stories, being part of it. And then, because he spent his early life in the Catholic tradition as a devout Catholic with a devout Catholic mother and went to a devout Catholic high school, he's able to bring to the dignity of the French Jesuit missionaries that came to those people. And in the intermingling of that relationship, in its sorrow and its horror and its beauty, to be able to find something to say about the relationship as it evolved, as it grew, and as it broke, and as it came together again. Joseph seems intent on reminding us that wherever we find our history, it's not going to be in a place of peace and beauty and light. It's going to be in a place of changing worldviews and misunderstandings and loss, and sometimes even in terror. And he challenges us to walk through that to morning, because when sun shines upon our bones, shines upon our lives, we can see more fully. There's a piece in the Orenda that moved me deeply to tears. I tried to read it out loud to Scott, but I had a huge difficulty doing that. So I'm not going to read it to you, but I'm going to try and tell you what it was about. And it's based on the stories or the journals of Father Brebeuf, who sent his journals back to France. And much of what is written in the Orenda comes from some of those journals. But the piece that he's telling about, he starts telling, you first hear it from Bird, the Huron protagonist in the story, who speaks, telling what happened in his life to his wife, who has been parted from him by death for many, many years. And so he talks to her and tells her what's going on. And at one point he says he's looking forward to a festival when he can have her once again in his arms. And you think, okay, I don't know what that means, but I'll go with it. And later on, snow falls. The young Iroquois girl that he adopts after killing her family is speaking about the creation of something outside the palisades of the new space that they're moving to, that she has no idea what it is. Every 12 or 15 years, the Huron people needed to pick up their community and move it to a new site for a variety of reasons, partly because the earth that they had been seeding with corn was giving up sparser crops every year, and partly because the wood that they used for weapons was becoming a little more scarce, and perhaps because their hunting practices had thinned out the animals. They would choose a new site, send scouts out till they found the perfect site, and then they would spend a season preparing to make the move to that new place. They'd sow their fields in their old community, and they would sow new fields in the new community so that the two might together provide sufficient food for the future. But they could not leave behind their dead, recognizing and believing that the lives of those who have died before them were just as significant and real to them beyond their deaths as they were in life, and reinforced by the stories and the telling of the stories to those who had passed on as we continue to speak to those who have died before us. They knew they could not leave their dead behind. And so the ceremony that they created that would have evolved over centuries was told again, and Joseph Orenda brings it to light, marking for us a beauty that is exquisite, beyond our possibility of even comprehending it. For 10 days, over the course of 10 days, the ceremony takes place. It's a gathering together of communities from all over who come together to take their dead to the new place. But how on earth do they do that? They actually take their dead to the new place. They dig up the bodies of those who have died. They hold them and they take from them whatever bits of flesh are left on them. Some of them are barely skeletons with nothing but a small bit of dried material left on them. Some of them still have some flesh attached to them, some newer bodies that still are filled with worms, are disinterred. Those that aren't so fresh have all of the skin and all of the flesh removed from them, all of the beaver pelts or anything that they had been wrapped in, all of that is carefully burned. And the bones are washed clean, mostly with the tears of the loved ones who tend to them. There's nothing repugnant, no being disgusted by what is happening in that group of people. They're merely honoring their dead and holding them once again. They place them in places of honor, and family and friends come and share memories and tell stories and are fed. Gifts are placed, and then the bones are taken and put in new beaver pelt bags and carried by the family from the place they have been to the new place. This deep, huge pit that has been dug, lined entirely with beaver pelts that line the bottom and the sides and up over the edges. And they are brought and held hanging from a scaffolding. The bodies that are too new to have been cleaned of their flesh are laid to the side and eventually placed in the bottom of that huge pit. And then the bodies, the bones of those that have been carried are laid upon them. The final beaver pelts folded over them, and the earth turned too. In that way, the souls, the spirits of those that they have loved are carried with them wherever they go. And it seemed to me that that was the work that Joseph was about in writing this book. Because none of us ever leave our pasts behind. The road, the tread mark on the left side of Joseph's back will be with him forever, as will that moment as he hit the pavement in front of that car, as will the pain and the sorrow that went before that decision, as will the conflicting stories and lifestyles of his father and his uncle who chose to live predominantly amongst the Aboriginal people. All of that confusion, all of that challenge, all of that sorrow, all of those mistakes, everything we do, we carry with us. And if we were to do as did the Huron people, take a moment to disinter those things that have etched our hearts, those things that have scarred our backs. If we took the moment to disinter them, to honor them, to recognize that all of that continues with us, to find within it those things that are good, that are beauty to us now, despite their wretchedness and horror at the time, but that have brought us hope, that have set us on a new path, that might offer light to the next step that we take. If we could carry those things with us, move them anywhere we were, honor them in that way, wrap them in the pelts of today, the richness of today, and so honor them, perhaps we would walk with more confidence, with more pride, with more care, with more recognition that our interconnections are not just lateral, but that they go deep through time and they will carry us into the future we cannot possibly know. It was the beauty of this ritual that I think wove for me the foundation upon which this entire story is written. But in the final words at the end, Joseph challenges us to recognize again that it's this moment, it's the turn of my head, it's the opening of a book, it's the speaking hello, it's the this moment that pulls all those bones of the past into it and that offers to the future the next breath. And so I share with you two pieces of writing. One, toward the end of the piece that he wrote about suicide, tells much about his experience of the moment. He says, "I'm not telling you this most intimate mistake of my life in order to lecture. I do think about it once in a while still, and even though it occurred so long ago, it never feels very far away. The bones are still with him. I sometimes catch myself thinking, what if I'd managed it? What if I'd died? Just look at what I would have missed." And it isn't even the big stuff, the grand stuff that comes to mind. It's always the little moments that catch me off guard. The weight of my wife's foot on my own under the covers at night. The puppy smell of our new dog. Feeling the tug on my fishing rod when the pickerel strikes my lure. Arguing with my teenage son about finding a job. It's these moments that make me thankful for my failure that night of my 16th birthday. That's when I give deep thanks that I failed. And then from the very end of the Orenda, we had the magic, the Orenda, before the crows came. The crows are the Jesuit missionaries draped in their black and always pecking around the dead, as crows are wont to do. We'd never questioned this before. Their claws first grasped our branches and their beaks first pecked our earth. Most of us will admit we were taken aback by how quickly the crows adapted. When you fall asleep laughing in the evening, it's difficult to awake crying in the sun. But this isn't just about sadness or pity or blame. We're all party to our own wants as well as to our own shortcomings. Aitensik, the sky woman and mother of the Wendat, she still sits by the fire watching with her eyes of polished shells. Aitensik doesn't like to give much away, but if you watch her expression close enough, sometimes she does. And so when the crows arrived to caw that our Orenda was unclean, at first we laughed. Aitensik did too. But she didn't laugh for the same reasons. She'd already foreseen the nests the crows had begun to build as they plucked the odd feather from our hair or begged a strap of hide from our bundle, even as we looked into their eyes. Aitensik laughed because she is just as imperfect as we are. She laughed because we couldn't see our own demise coming. But hindsight is sometimes too easy, isn't it? And so maybe this is what Aitensik wants to tell. What's happened in the past can't stay in the past. For the same reason, the future is only just a breath away. Now is what's most important, Aitensik says. Orenda can't be lost, just misplaced. The past and future are present. Kelly shared the story about the camp that Joseph Boyden and his friends are putting together, Camp Onakawana. It's a camp that he hopes to be able to take young children to, teenage boys, so that they can experience what it's like to be in the footprints of those who have gone before, experience the world the way they had, perhaps even the Orenda and the life that is in all things. And so as he finished telling his story to the CBC back in 2011 of that moment of suicidal intent, he finishes it almost as a message to those children that will come together in this camp. I tell this story in the hope of reaching someone out there, even one person who is suffering the pain I speak of. If you hear this, talk. Speak it out loud. Walk through that night if you need to. Walk away from the road. Walk to morning. Allow this pain to be exposed to sunlight instead. The story that is the Orenda is a story that is sometimes difficult to read. The violence and the graphic imagery, the stuff that I more often put away from myself than that I expose myself to. But it is a story of the interweaving of peoples, and the interweaving of peoples is almost always a gory business. We have done it so much now that perhaps we can finally see that we are one people, and that the stories that come carried in the beaver pelts, in the bags, in the bones of those who travel with us are our stories as well. And so we must sit with the pain and the agony of them and feel it in our own bones so that we can carry it as they have for so long. And perhaps in that always present next breath, we might feel a rising of hope, a rising of opportunity, a rising of a new day in which we honor, truly honor, the life that is in all things, and that we have but to see, to recognize, and to celebrate. Thank you. Those of you who were here last week will recognize that that question was actually about last week's message, but it kind of worked. The Orenda could be the door through which we go that shifts our perspective to something new. Any moment can be a door. Any book can be an opportunity. Any truth that we find that has been hidden in our own heart, a truth that is about our past or the past of those who walk with us, any of that can be an opportunity to see the world in a different way, to change our perspective, to challenge ourselves, to own our history, and to open ourselves to our future. And so as you leave this place, perhaps as you step across the threshold, you can feel yourself step into a world that needs your heart in a new way, a way you maybe haven't thought of before, or a way that you've practiced for many, many years, and you know still needs to come into being in the world. Step through that door. And as you go, know that we go with you. We watch one another away, holding one another as we go, so that we never walk alone. We always and ever walk with one another in the spirit of love. Go from this place in peace.